Hey guys, Luke on Sean's channel. Today I'm really excited to bring you guys another Cyberdragon deck profile. This is for the September 2024 format. We're in a new format now, although granted the top decks weren't hit nearly as badly as some would have wanted. There's still enough change to this format to bring a new profile. I won't beat around the bush any further. Let's just get straight into this Cyberdragon 2024 deck profile. Of course, 3 copies of Cyberdragon, the main man himself. You want to be maximizing this because we of course use Machine Duplication and we want to use the Machine Duplication play as often as we can. So 3 copies of Cyberdragon is of course very important to maximize out in this deck. We also maximize our copies of Core. Core of course is also very important for the strategy. Core has a mandatory effect on normal summon that you add 1 cyber spell trap from your deck to your hand, and then also Core has a graveyard effect that if he's in the graveyard and you control no monsters, you're able to banish Core from the graveyard and then special summon a Cyberdragon monster from your deck. Of course you can only use one or the other Core effect per turn, but the more important effect is the one on normal summon that you're able to search for a cyber spell / trap, which of course is very good for going for our extenders, searchers and recovery cards. So 3 copies of Core, very important as well. I will run 1 copy of Nachster and 2 copies of Herz. So Nachster is very good, however I mostly find that 1 is fine. If you want to run it at 2, that's absolutely fine, but this deck space is very tight, so I think running a Nachster is optimal enough. In fact, I've been running Nachster at 1 for the past year or so and I haven't run into any problems yet. Nachster is very good because him and a Cyberdragon in your hand is pretty much a 2-card combo in order to go for your Seeker or any other like Link 2 plays. Because Nachster has the effect that if he's in your hand you can discard 1 other monster to the graveyard in order to special summon him out, and then when Nachster is special summoned you can target 1 machine monster with 2100 attack or defense in your graveyard and special summon it, which of course if you're using Nachster's effect and pitching Cyberdragon you're able to bring out that Cyberdragon that you pitched, which of course is very good for going to your Link 2 play of Seeker, so I definitely recommend running Nachster for that reason alone. But Herz is also a very good 2-card combo when you're putting it with Galaxy Soldier to get out your Cyberdragon Infinity, so it's very important you run Herz because Herz has the effect that if this card is sent to the graveyard you can add 1 Cyberdragon from your deck or graveyard to your hand. The reason why that's very good is because 1, you're able to dig deeper into your deck to get a Cyberdragon out from the deck and into your hand, which of course is great, but the fact that it says you can add a Cyberdragon from your graveyard to your hand is also very important because pretty much all of your Cyberdragon monsters have the effect that they're known as Cyberdragon while on the field or in the graveyard. So say if you have Core in the graveyard and Herz gets sent to the graveyard, what you can actually do is target that Core in the graveyard and add to your hand because he's known as Cyberdragon while he's in the graveyard. Herz has another effect when it's special summoned it becomes level 5, but that's pretty much never used. You can only use one or the other effects and we're mostly going to be using that plussing effect. So 2 copies of Herz is all you need and 1 copy of Nachster I find to be very good and very optimal for the deck. The only Cyberdark card worth running at all of course is Cyberdark Chimera. You're able to get this as an additional normal summon when you're using your Cyberdark Realm that you can search off of Core. So with Cyberdark Chimera you're able to discard 1 spell or trap and then you can add a power bond from your deck to your hand, which is very good because if you're able to get that to go off you can also use the other effect that also once when you fusion summon this turn you can also banish monsters from your graveyard as material, which of course is absolutely great because it's a good way that we're able to pretty much overload fusion for a power bond, which I find to be really good. Honestly, Cyberdark Chimera is the only Cyberdark monster I find to be good at all. You guys probably already know how much I badmouth that deck over the years on this channel, but hey, Cyberdark Chimera is 1 good card from the Cyberdark archetype, so definitely run that 1 in this deck. I also like to run 2 copies of Galaxy Soldier. Galaxy Soldier of course is an honorary Cyberdragon card because it's part of a 2-card combo to go into your Infinity, so definitely run Galaxy Soldier at 2. I also like to run 1 copy of Therion King Regulus. I think Regulus is just a very good card. The fact that all our monsters are machine monsters is really good because then we have no problem getting Regulus out, and Regulus just works as pretty much an Omni Negate, and considering that this is a combo deck we really don't want to get interrupted, so having Regulus here of course is very good for the strategy. 1 copy of Jizukiru, the Star Destroying Kaiju. What I really like about most decks is decks that are able to search a Kaiju, and Cyberdragon is no exception. You of course can search this off of your Cyber Repair Plant, so it's not like you have to hard draw a Kaiju in order to draw the out. Honestly, I think a lot like Galaxy Soldier, Jizukiru is just an honorary Cyberdragon card at this point, so definitely run a 1 copy in the deck. Just some hand traps now. I think 2 copies of Blossom is very good, and also 2 copies of Droll and Lockbird. I have a side deck to go into afterwards as well, so I can show you what ways you can like side out some of these cards depending on what the matchup is. But they're at these ratios just because the deck space is very tight, so I think running these two at 2 copies of each, of course, is very important. Going to spells now, the main searcher of the deck is Cyber Emergency, which simply states that you can add 1 Cyberdragon monster from your deck to your hand, which is great for consistency, but also if you're really stuck, I don't use this effect too often, but Cyber Emergency also has another effect that honestly almost never comes up, is that if the activation of this card in its owner's possession was negated, you can discard 1 card and add this card back to your hand, which can come in handy, but honestly it never really came up for me because of course it only happens when the activation is negated, which most times never really happens, but still it's a cool little tech option to know about. So 3 copies of Cyber Emergency, very good for the deck. Sticking with searchers, Cyber Repair Plant is another great searcher. Well, it can only be activated on conditions, so the condition is if you have Cyber Dragon in the graveyard, you can activate one of these effects, but if you have 3 or more Cyber Dragons in your graveyard, you can activate both of these effects in sequence. And as I mentioned earlier, pretty much all of your Cyber Dragon monsters are called Cyber Dragon while they're in the graveyard, so you've no problem getting 3 or more Cyber Dragons in the grave in order to activate both of these effects in sequence. The effects being that you can add 1 light machine monster from your deck to your hand, and then the second effect reading that you can target 1 light machine monster in your graveyard and shuffle that target into the deck. This is great for searching out the Kaiju. That's what I mainly search off of it when I'm in certain situations. And also the shuffling back into the deck effect can be good for sometimes as well. If we're kind of in the late game and we have Cyber Dragons in graveyard and we miraculously get a Machine Duplication, what we can do is shuffle 1 of those Cyber Dragons back into the deck in order for Machine Duplication to resolve fully. So very important to run 1 copy of Cyber Repair Plant. Cyberdark Realm, another good consistency card, but honestly we just use it for the first effect. Now when this card is activated, you can add 1 Cyberdark monster from your deck to your hand, and then also during the main phase you can immediately after this effect resolves normal summon 1 Cyberdark monster. This is pretty much here just because core can pretty much be like 1 card combo in order to get 2 buys in the field. You can normal summon core. Core can search Realm. Realm you're able to activate to get your Chimera, and then you're able to normal summon your Chimera. And if you're able to extend your plays from there, fantastic. It's really good, especially if you're using Chimera's effect to search Power Bond, and then you can overload Fusion as well. So 1 copy of Cyberdark Realm is very important. Rounding off the Cyber spell traps, we have Cyber Revsystem. Some people cut this card, but honestly I still think it's very important, just because if you get interrupted and you have like no other ways to extend, I think Cyber Revsystem is a very good extender. Simply reads you can special summon 1 Cyber Dragon from your hand or graveyard, and then it cannot be destroyed by card effects, which I think is just very good. Going into the fusion cards now, 1 copy of Power Bond. Power Bond I used to run at 2, but considering that Chimera is able to search it, there's really no need to run any more copies than 1 copy. Power Bond, for those you don't know, is a fusion spell on machine monsters that when you fusion summon using Power Bond, that machine monster you bring out gains attack equal to its original attack. So you're basically just doubling up the attack of whatever machine monster you fusion summon Power Bond into. The only downside of Power Bond is during the end phase, if you activated it, you have to take damage equals to that original attack of that monster. But that's fine, it's really not that big of a cost if we're going for some for guys like Chimeratech Rampage Dragon or even Cyber Twin Dragon. We're more willing to take the damage if we're able to get up a really big powerful monster, so Power Bond of course is essential for that. But I also like to run Overload Fusion. Overload Fusion is another fusion spell that you can fusion summon 1 Dark Machine monster from the X deck by banishing fusion materials listed on it from your field or graveyard. So it's pretty much like Miracle Fusion but for Dark Machine monsters. We're almost always going for a Rampage Dragon when we're going for this play, but on the odd case that it's kind of like late in the game and we know for a fact that we can OTK, we can also use for Chimeratech Overdragon as well. And the final, not exactly fusion spell, but kind of in the same vein, card I run is 1 copy Duality. Duality is great because you can tribute 1 light or dark monster, then special summon 1 light or dark monster from your hand or X deck with the same original type and level but a different original attribute. This is really fantastic for rounding off games, because what I would often do is the main gimmick of Cyber Dragons is that you're able to contact fuse. So if you have Clockwork Night out and then all of your monsters and your opponent monsters become a machine, what you're able to do is contact fuse your Chimeratech Overdragon, deal in a load of damage, and then after that you're able to duality into your twin dragon, which I find to be great. But there's a few other targets you can go for off of this. For example, if you have your Chimeratech Megafleet dragon, you can duality into your Cyber Eternity dragon, or even if you just have like a Cyber dragon, you're able to tag out into Chimeratech Rampage dragon. There's just a lot of targets for duality, so I definitely think it's worth running at 1 copy in this deck. I used to run at 2 copies, but then I found myself breaking on it like almost always, so 1 copy is more than enough. I also like to run 1 copy of Machine Duplication. Machine Duplication reads that you target 1 machine monster you control with 500 or less attack and special summon up to 2 monsters from your deck with the same name as that face-up monster. So, as you already know, all of your Cyber Dragon monsters, their names are Cyber Dragon whether on the field or in the graveyard. So if you have Core in the field and you activate Machine Duplication, rather than bringing out 2 copies of Core, since Core's name is Cyber Dragon while it's on the field, you're able to bring out 2 copies of regular old Cyber Dragon, which of course is fantastic. The only thing I would say to be careful about with this card is if you have Clockwork Night on the field, Clockwork Night increases the attack and defense of all your monsters by 500. So if you have Core out and you also have a Clockwork Night active, Core would no longer be 500 or less attack, so Machine Duplication will become worthless in this situation. But still only run at 1 copy. I used to run out more copies, but then Thrust was introduced into the game, so I only think that there's a necessity to run at 1. I like to run 1 copy of Foolish Burial. Foolish Burial a few times has come in very handy for me, so I do think it's a very good recommendation to run, mostly for a few reasons. One reason being that we're able to send the likes of Herz to the graveyard, and then Herz has the effect that we're able to search a Cyber Dragon, which of course is great. Not only that, there's also Core, who has the effect that if he's in the graveyard, he can banish his to special summon Cyber Dragon from deck. But also, if we have Therion King Regulus in our hand, he needs a machine in the graveyard in order to bring himself out. So if we're able to Foolish Burial one of our monsters and then activate Regulus in order to bring him out, that could be very good for our plays and a good way to get Negate out as quickly as possible. So I definitely recommend running 1 copy of Foolish Burial. 3 copies of Clockwork Night. Clockwork Night, of course, is very good because, as I mentioned earlier, one of the main gimmicks of Cyber Dragons is that they can contact fuse, and if you control Cyber Dragon and then all of the monsters your opponent controls are turned into machine monsters off Clockwork Night, what you're able to do is essentially contact fuse your opponent's entire board in order to go into your Chimeratech Overdragon, who needs 1 Cyber Dragon and 1+ machine monster to go into him, and then he gains 1000 attack for each material you use for his summon. So Clockwork Night is great for that, but not only that, Clockwork Night also increases the attack and defense of your monster by 500 and decrease the attack and defense of all of your opponent's monsters by 500. So it's fantastic for getting your machines up to just a little bit more attack, so you're able to definitely OTK for most of the turns. But also, in some circumstances, Clockwork Night is able to search out a Regulus because you can banish this card from the graveyard and discard 1 card and add 1 Earth machine monster from your deck to your hand, which of course the only target is Regulus, which honestly doesn't come up a whole lot, but when it does, it can be pretty satisfying. So 3 copies of Clockwork Night, definitely essential to run. We would run 1 copy of Call by the Grave. This is the combo deck. We don't want to get interrupted. Call by the Grave is essential. I also run 2 copies of Triple Tactics Trust. Trust is a great way of searching out a bunch of our like really important powerful normal spells, such as the Machine Duplication, the Lightning Storm, and also 1 copy of Talent. So I find this to be a really good package, especially because we're going second deck. A lot of times our opponent has like a bunch of monsters on the field that are able to set up really powerful negates. So Thirst is a good way of searching out some powerful cards, and also Talent is a good way of activating some very powerful effects if our opponent interrupts us. So 2 copies of Thrust and 1 copy of Talent I find to be very good. Going to some board breakers now. We are going second deck, so 2 copies of Forbidden Droplet. Not only is Forbidden Droplet fantastic at negating monster effects, but also the fact that it halves the attack of our opponent's monsters that we negate is really important, because that means that we're able to deal a lot more damage in order to win the game. So I definitely recommend running Droplet at 2, and I also recommend running 2 copies of Lightning Storm. We are going second deck, so we can abuse Lightning Storm, of course, who reads that if you control no face-up cards, you can activate 1 of these effects. Either destroy all attack position monsters your opponent controls, or destroy all spells and traps your opponent controls. Either one is very good, so I definitely recommend running 2 copies of each of these cards. Then finally, rounding the deck off, I run 2 copies of Imperm. Going into the extract now, 1 copy of Cyberdragon Seeger. Seeger is a Link 2 that needs 2 machine monsters including Cyberdragon, but he has a great effect that during each battle phase, if this card is not declared an attack, you can quick effect target 1 machine monster you control with 2100 or more attack, then for the rest of this turn, that monster gains 2100 attack and defense, which is really great if we're pairing it alongside our Rampage Dragon, because Rampage Dragon has an effect that's able to attack 3 times, and if we're boosting it with Seeger, he's able to attack 3 times with 4200 attack, which is fantastic. So 1 copy of Seeger is very essential. I also like to run 1 copy of Almirage. Almirage we mostly use in order to get core off the field if we have some effects that we can use with him in the graveyard, such as your Regulus or whatever. So 1 copy of Almirage is very important. We run 2 copies of Cyberdragon Nova and 2 copies of Cyberdragon Infinity. Nova, of course, is great because it takes 2 level 5 machine type monsters in order to go into him. If he's on the field, you're able to detach 1 XYZ material from the card and target 1 Cyberdragon in the graveyard and then special summon that target, which of course is great. It helps to get more bodies on the field, which we always love to see. But also Nova has a very good effect that if this card in your possession is sent to the graveyard by your opponent's card effect, you're able to special summon 1 machine type fusion monster from your extra deck, which is great for going for some really powerful fusion monsters, just the Cyber Twin Dragon or even the Cyber Eternity Dragon. They're the 2 guys I bring out mostly off of Nova's effect. So that of course is very good, but also Nova is an easy way for us to go to Infinity. Because we have Nova on the field, we're able to just overlay Nova for Infinity, which of course is a fantastic card. Infinity is an Omni Negate and just an overall great boss monster. He's able to suck up an attack position monster your opponent controls and use him as material for Infinity. He also gains 200 attack for each material that's attached onto him. But honestly, just having a in-archetype boss monster that's an Omni Negate like Infinity is a dream come true for any archetype. So 2 copies of Nova and 2 copies of Infinity. Very important to run in this deck. I also like to run 1 copy of Zeus. Zeus is great. We're able to overlay it into one of our machine XYZ monsters on the field if an XYZ monster attacks this turn. So it's very easy for us to go into Zeus that way. Zeus is a board wipe for the cost of attaching 2 materials, but that effect isn't even once per chain. So you're able to, if you have a bunch of materials on Infinity already, overlay for Zeus, you're able to board wipe multiple times. So 1 copy of Zeus Sky Thunder I think is very essential for this build. Going into the contact fusing guys, we run 1 copy of Megafleet and 2 copies of Fortress Dragon. Megafleet you're able to go into by using 1 Cyberdragon monster and 1+ monster in the extra monster zone, which means it can be your opponent's monster in the extra monster zone, which is a fantastic way of getting rid of problematic monsters. And the original attack of this card becomes 1200 times the number of materials used for its special summon, which of course is very good. It can get him up to 2400 attack easily, but we mostly use it because it's an easy way of dealing with our opponent's problematic monsters they have in the extra monster zone. But Chimeratech Fortress Dragon is of course a lot better. I already said what this card did earlier, especially when you're pairing it with Clockwork Night. You're able to get this guy up to a ridiculous amount of attack by contact fusing nearly your entire board and your opponent's board. So it's very important you run 2 copies of Fortress and 1 copy of Megafleet. So for OTK enablers, 2 copies of Chimeratech Rampage Dragon and then 1 copy of Chimeratech Overdragon. Rampage Dragon of course is a lot better than Overdragon because he takes 2+ Cyberdragon monsters to go into. When he's fusion summoned, you can pop spells or traps on the field up to the number of cards used for his fusion summon, and once per turn you can send up to 2 light machine monsters from your deck to the graveyard. If you do, for each monster sent to the graveyard, this card gains 1 additional attack during the battle phase. So as I said, if you're pairing this up with your Seeger and you're able to pull this off, you dump 2 monsters off a Rampage Dragon and you go into battle phase with Seeger on the field and Rampage, you're able to use Seeger to boost up Rampage Dragon's attack up to 4200, and being able to attack 3 times with 4200, it is of course just very good and an easy way to OTK. So it's essential to run Rampage Dragon at least 2. A Chimeratech Overdragon can come in handy sometimes. It's just mostly the fact that I main deck Overload Fusion, and sometimes in a late game if we have like a big amount of machine monsters in the graveyard, we're able to overload into Overdragon, who can get up to a ridiculous amount of attack. He simply needs a Cyber Dragon and 1+ machine monsters to go into him. When he's brought out, you must send all other cards you control to the graveyard, and his original attack and defense comes equal to the number of fusion materials used for his fusion summon times 800. So it's very good to get him up to, so it's very easy to get him up to a ridiculous amount of attack. 1 copy of Cyber Eternity Dragon. Eternity Dragon's okay. I mostly use him as a duality target. It is honestly very rare that actually hard go into him. He has a decent graveyard effect though, that you can banish this card from the graveyard. This turn your opponent cannot target fusion monsters you control with card effects. Also they cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects, which can come in handy sometimes, but again most mostly Eternity is used as a duality target to round off games. Speaking of good duality targets, Cyber Twin Dragon is a good way of rounding off this extra deck. I would occasionally hard go into him, especially with Power Bond. Power Bond is absolutely crazy because Cyber Twin Dragon can attack twice. With 2800 attack, that's very good on its own. If you Power Bond into him, you're able to attack twice with a monster with 5600 attack. It's absolutely crazy. So I of course highly recommend running one copy of Cyber Twin Dragon to round off the extra deck. Going into the side deck now, I run an additional 2 copies of Jizukiru. If all our opponent does is summon out towers and we already used the Kaiju once, it can be very hard to recycle them back. So having another 2 copies in the side deck is just a way to make sure that we're never going to be stuck outing some of our opponent's monsters. So 2 copies of Jizukiru I think is really good, especially if you're going against the likes of Pearly or whatever that are able to bring out towers very easily. I definitely recommend running an extra 2 copies of Jizukiru for that. Rounding off all the hand traps in the main deck, we run an extra copy of each. This is the 3rd copy of each of the hand traps you run, so an extra copy of Imperm, an extra copy of Droll, an extra copy of Ash. It just depends on what you are playing against, what you think might be more appropriate to side in and side out. So definitely keep those in mind. I like to run 3 copies of Gravekeeper's Inscription in the side deck, just because I actually did find that this was very helpful when I was playtesting this deck. There is a lot of decks that rely so heavily on the graveyard, and the fact that Gravekeeper's Inscription has a lingering effect that mostly targets graveyard decks, I think it's just really good. So I definitely recommend running 3 copies of Inscription in the side deck. I also like to run 3 copies of Raigeki. This is an OTK going second deck, so of course Raigeki is just a very powerful board wipe. It's non-targeting as well, which I find to be fantastic because a lot of cards for nowadays for some reasons they cannot be targeted. So Raigeki is another classic card that's able to just deal with that, and the fact that you can activate this at any point, it's not as restricting as Lightning Storm, I think is a very good side deck option. So 3 copies of Raigeki, very good. For the back row decks, 2 copies of Cosmic Cyclone. You never know, you could be going against Runic, which can be very annoying. And Cosmic Cyclone, you pay 1000, target 1 spell trap in the field and banish it. Being able to banish their fountain, considering that fountain's at 2, if you're able to cyclone both their fountains, the Runic players can be very crippled by that. So 2 copies of Cosmic Cyclone. If we're going against banishing deck, I like to have 1 copy of Cyberload Fusion in the side deck, just because it can be very good if a bunch of our Cyber Dragon monsters get banished, that we're able to recycle them back into the deck in order to go into a good fusion monster. And considering the amount of decks that just banished now, Cyberload Fusion can be a great tech option, but I don't really necessarily find it to be as good in the main deck as in the side deck. You want to be very aware of what you're facing if you want to side this in or not. But then finally, rounding off the side deck, I like to run 1 copy of Limiter Removal. By the time you guys see this, the tins are probably out, so you guys can check out the new alt art of Limiter Removal. But I quite like the old classic for now. But yeah, I also find Limiter Removal a very fun card to play. It's very classic Cyber Dragons that we always like to see here on the channel. So 1 copy of Limiter Removal rounds off the side deck. So that about does it for the deck. Please let me know what you guys think. I'm really happy with the way this deck turned out. If you guys have any suggestions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we also have membership on the channel as well, so be sure you guys check that out too. But if not, there's plenty more good content already on the channel that you guys should definitely check out. But for now, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.